The dog is here to join me. After seeing a ton of people play Graveyard Keeper, I had it on my wish list for a long time to check out, and I gave it an honest shot, and honestly, I don't understand it. I played 50 days of Graveyard Keeper, and I just don't understand it. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little rundown of what happened in those 50 days and why I kind of gave up. And I know there's a lot of Graveyard Keeper lovers out there. So if you have any tips on how to maybe get back into the game, how to keep progressing, because right now I feel like I just don't know how to do anything. And I think that's a big reason why I haven't really continued playing. I just don't understand. So if you guys have any tips, let me know down below. But this is kind of what happened in the 50 days. The game started with me buying groceries at the store. I walked out and got a call from my partner when a car hit me and I died. I ended up in this weird limbo area where I was telling this strange man in all black that I wanted to go home. He told me that our new home would be a graveyard and we would be a graveyard keeper, and to return home we would have to be good at our job. He then told us to go dig up Jerry and said that he would help us. I woke up in my new house and found Jerry, a floating skull, in my backyard, and he told us that he faintly remembers this land and the people around it. As we were walking through the garden, I ran into a donkey holding a fresh corpse from the town. We quickly figured out that we can understand each other. He told me that he would bring me new corpses from time to time, and then he left. Jerry came back and said that we should grab the corpse and chop it up while it was still fresh. So I entered the morgue for the first time, slapped the corpse onto the table, and extracted its flesh, which ended up unlocking some disturbing new recipes. I took the chopped up corpse to the graveyard where Jerry taught me how to dig, and I buried the body. I threw the body in the grave and was awarded a burial certificate. The bishop arrived to the graveyard and was surprised to see me, as they have been expecting a new graveyard keeper for the past 30 years. He told me that my graveyard was a shit show and that I would need to get it to a rating of 5 in order to be promoted to a cleric. He also said that he comes every week, only on Sunday. I figured out later that days in this game were named after the 7 deadly sins, I think, but it still made me confused for the longest time on how to tell the days apart. And last but not least, he said that I would get a burial certificate from each corpse and I could trade it in for money at the town's tavern. I was then told that I needed to unlock technologies in order to build and craft more items. And I'll be honest, I read this tutorial page and was like, okay, and then I completely forgot about technologies, which would come back to bite me in the butt later. And so I got to work clearing some twigs on my graveyard to make it look a little bit nicer. Considering I was at minus 27 quality, I had quite a ways to go before I reached 5. I decided to go find the tavern in town and headed over. And side note, why does it take forever to walk to town from my house? Like, I can't walk any faster? I met Heradric, the tavern keeper, who asked me when I was planning on opening the church. I don't think I'm head of the church, so I have no idea when. I gave him the burial certificate and he gave me some money in return. I asked him if he buys meat and he told me yes, but it needs to have a royal meat stamp on it to ensure that it's real. I can buy a royal meat stamp via the mailbox at the church, but it'll cost a lot. So an alternative was to ask a guy named Snake for a fake stamp. I'm assuming this means I can sell human flesh, but yeah. Before I left, Horderic asked if I could deliver a letter to the blacksmith for him. And so I ventured out and found the blacksmith, just south of the tavern. I gave him the letter, and I guess Horderic asked him to get rid of some slimes again. And the blacksmith said he doesn't have time for stuff like this, so he asked if I could help. And so he gave me a rusty sword, which I would have to repair with the whetstone at the grinder, and then slay the slimes behind his house. I repaired my sword and got to work. The slimes were pretty easy to defeat, and so I returned to the blacksmith, who gave me some simple iron parts as a reward. I went back to the tavern to tell Horderic that the deed was done, and he gave me a beer in return. And so I walked all the way back home, where I ran into Jerry again, who told me that there's a cellar in my basement and that I should check it out since there's food items in there like wheat. He then said that if I give him beer, he would tell me more information on how to finally get home. Well, luckily, I just got a beer from the tavern, so I gave it to Jerry, and all he told me was to be more careful, saying that I'm not from here. That wasn't very helpful, so I decided to just go to sleep for the day. When I woke up, there was a ghost named Yorick at the side of my bed telling me that there's an unpleasant fellow buried next to him in the graveyard. And so he asked us to dig up the corpse buried in the lower right grave and toss it in the river. And I said sure, and he gave us an exhumation permission to complete the task. When that convo was over, I decided to check out my cellar when it showed me this creepy little goblin guy living under my house. Okay. I decided to ignore that for now and dig up the grave for Yorick. I cut up some of his flesh and couldn't figure out where to dump him in the river, so I just plopped his body on the dirt next to it. After that nasty task, I decided to head back into my cellar and clean up what I didn't before. Once the cellar was clean, I wanted to start the task of cleaning up my graveyard, so I headed over and started using some wood repair kits to repair as many gravestones as I could. When that was over, I went into town to explore more, and when I got to the tavern, I realized that I could talk to Hoderick about the garden at my house. Hoderick told me that the garden was seized by the merchant and that I would need to talk to him in order to use the garden that was on my own home property. Hoderick said that the merchant comes to town every Pitchfork Day, so I added that to my never-ending to-do list. The next morning, I explored my technologies and unlocked the Sawhorse blueprint. And when I walked out of my house, Jerry was screaming about an Inquisitor that was going up the path to Witch Hill, and he said that the Inquisitor would kill him. So to calm Jerry, I told him that I would go distract him. So off I went to find Witch Hill. On my adventure, I ran into the body that I threw by the river, decomposing, and then I realized that I could actually throw it in the river. Oops, that's my bad. Once the corpse plopped into the river, Jerry came and yelled at me yet again and told me that the best way to get rid of a body is to burn it. I hadn't unlocked the crematorium yet, so bodies will continue to go into the river for further notice. Witch Hill wasn't west of my house, so I decided to head east, where I found it right outside of my farm. I ran into the Inquisitor and introduced myself as a new graveyard keeper. He believed my lie, kind of, and then invited me to watch the witch burning ceremony. I refused the invitation and said that I get queasy easily, and then he told me that it wasn't an offer, and then I was forced to go. How lovely. On the walk up to the top of the hill, the Inquisitor was telling me about their mission of burning witches to prevent the rise of the dark cult. Then I watched this poor witch burn and told the Inquisitor that I would be his friend. In fact, I did not want to be his friend, but he asked me directly and I don't like confrontation. And when the witch was finally burnt to a crisp, the Inquisitor asked me to meet him again on an Upper Arrow day. And so I returned to my farm and decided to make a sawhorse for my working area, and I spent the rest of my night collecting logs. When I woke up the next morning, Yorick appeared again and thanked me for getting rid of the annoying corpse. He then told me a little about his backstory and that he wished he was a better person while he was alive. Then I learned about the grave rating and that each corpse has a rating of good and bad. Bad corpses would mean a worse graveyard rating and vice versa. The donkey dropped off another corpse outside the morgue, so I brought it in, chopped up its body, and buried it in the graveyard. I unlocked some more technologies and then headed to bed for the night. The next morning, I went to the tavern to sell some burial certificates that I had been holding. I bought some materials from the blacksmith, headed home, and made my first stonecutter. This would finally give me the crafting recipe that I needed to make gravestones and finally increase my graveyard rating. I realized that I had another corpse waiting on me, so I went and took care of that right away and plopped a brand new gravestone on it. And then I spent the next day fixing more broken graves. It was finally Pitchfork Day, and so I went to meet the merchant in town. I asked him about the garden in front of my house, and he said that he completely forgot about it. He then told me that he would sell it to me for 10 gold coins. I didn't even have silver coins, so I said, that's too much. And he was like, okay, what about 5? And I said, no, too much. And then he called me poor and said we could make a deal if I delivered him a bunch of veggies. I said, no way. And then he said that I can't use the garden at all. Oops. I didn't know that was going to happen, so now I have to try and backtrack to make amends. So I apologized and he accepted, and he said that he would sell the garden for 1 gold coin. Another option was to ask him about hiccup grass, and he told me that he couldn't taste anymore and would need hiccup grass to cure it. So I said I would grab him some and deliver it to him next time. I returned to my farm and decided that I wanted to work more on fixing up my graveyard. So I unlocked the carpenter's workbench technology, crafted the building materials, then placed the workbench down. I made some wood repair kits, and on my way over to the graveyard, I ran into another corpse, which I cut up and buried with the rest of his lifelong friends. And the next few days were spent trying to spiffy up the graveyard for the bishop's next visit. I'm going to fast forward here a lot because I was just gathering materials and crafting new technologies in hopes of being able to unlock more quests, and to be honest at this point, I was kind of losing interest because it got really grindy and I couldn't figure out what exactly was going on. So I'm just gonna cut out the more repetitive, boring parts and get to some of the juicier parts that I actually encountered. First things first, I finished making my graveyard nice and I unlocked the church. I am now a cleric, even though I know nothing about running a church, and I have a basement, and it's filled with a bunch of broken bookcases. I learned that you can study different resources in this game, and I figured that this is important, but I never really quite figured out what to do with the studied materials. The bishop told me that the more faith that I bring to the church, the more money people will donate. And then he asked me for a fish fillet. I don't even know how to get fish in this game yet, so he won't be getting that for a while. I went to lead my first sermon and all of the churchgoers literally said meh, like, okay, I'm trying my best, this is my first time. And when I went to check on my report card afterwards, it literally said failed. Okay, game, you got me there, but I'll get you next time. I had found some hiccup grass. I'm not really sure where, but I'm assuming I picked it up somewhere while exploring. And so I gave it to the merchant on the next pitchfork day. The merchant took a bite out of the grass and then ate a cookie. He said that the hiccup grass didn't help bring his sense of taste back, and it must be the curse that was put upon him when he was younger. He said that if there's any witches left that the Inquisitor hasn't burned, specifically someone named Clotho, that Clotho would help lift the curse. He said to look for her in the western swamp and buy a love potion from her to cure him. After much exploring and looking it up on the wiki, I finally found Clotho in the swamp, but didn't have enough friendship points with her to trade for anything. So the love potion will have to wait, just like everything else. I needed to figure out where to find seeds, and it took me until this point in the game to realize that I could walk through the wheat fields and find a farmer who sells seeds for the garden. Of course. And so I bought some carrot seeds, went back to the garden, and planted them. I wanted to explore the town more, and I met an astronomer who said he would tell me more about home if I brought him a diary from the old graveyard keeper. I'll add that task to my to-do list, but side note, he also sells super cool stuff like ink. And so I bought a vial of ink and delivered it, along with some paper that I had collected along the way, to this guy in the tavern who told me he wanted to be a poet. The poet thanked me and said that I could trade in a bottle of wine for a story, yet another item I have no idea how to get. It was Sunday, so I ran my second sermon, and this time it was a success. I think this will be a good way of making money, but it sucks that it only happens once a week. When the sermon was over, I explored the cellar of my house and finally repaired the stones blocking the way. And this is when I realized that the house cellar and the church basement were connected. A few days later, I revisited the cellar and ran into this little goblin guy named Snake. I recognized the name and realized that this was the guy that Horderic from the tavern was telling me about earlier. He needed help opening the gate behind him and needed us to bring him a key. Apparently, Snake only comes around every whatever day, so I just had to wait for him to come back to give him the key. While that was happening, I ran into this guy named Dig just outside of town and bought seed oil from him. Remember the donkey that brings corpses? Well, he refused to deliver any more bodies without pay and requested carrots and oil for his carriage. I got the carrots earlier, and so I delivered that and the oil to the donkey, and he said, "Finally," and dropped the corpse that he's been carrying outside of my morgue for like the last 2 weeks. And so I continued gathering resources, unlocking technologies, and running sermons. Snake finally came back, so I gave him the key and he walked me to the back. I thought I saw the old graveyard keeper's diary, so I walked over to it and then a grate burned me to death. And then I woke up back alive and completely normal in my bed. Strange, but I'll take it. So I went back into the cellar to try and find the diary again when I ran into Snake, who was like, "How the fuck are you immortal? I hate you." Like, thank you for your kind words, Snake. Love you too. He said that I should use my immortality to help him search the dungeon for some things he needed, aka a bucket of blood and bloody nails. Gross. I explored this back room more and found someone tied up in the back, like BDSM style, and he said his name was Gunter, and he asked me to hit him with his sword a couple of times just so he could feel something. Blech.
Ew, don't say that.
Which was very weird and didn't help the BDSM-ness of the situation.
No. No.
After that weird hitting session, he told me that he was a zombie that was made by the old master. He also said that I could make more zombies with some magic and they would help me around my farm. I would need to figure this out later because that actually sounds super helpful. When that was over, I decided to head into the dungeon in search of the bucket of blood and bloody nails. I didn't get very far and succumbed to death by bat and slime over and over again. I tried the dungeon a few more times and still didn't even get past level 1. And this is where I gave up on the game and I haven't played since.
He just wants to sit like this.
Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you guys have any tips, like I said before, leave them down below. I might give it another shot. I don't know, but I heard it gets good. I heard it's a super fun game. I just don't get it.
Oh, it's okay, buddy.
There's a party next door, so he's borking. But yeah, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see y'all later. Bye! Say bye!